There's some stories that I don't necessarily tell to too many people because they're really bizarre. Or like I don't have like I guess the context might be kind of crazy, or I don't know how to explain it well, or whatever. So I'm just gonna go ahead and tell it the way that I need to tell it, and hopefully it won't come across too creepy or just bizarre, which it might, and I don't really care because it's just how it happened. So, out of high school, I went to work for Bob Backlund for 2 years. Then I went to work for former ECW television champion for 2 years, Jason Knight. Then I went to work for a couple indie workers, indie wrestlers. Then I was a glassblower in Vermont for a year. And then I formed my own sketch and improv comedy troupe. And I wanted to like brand my guys, right? Like I didn't want to just have like, a couple stoners on stage dressed in like college attire and, bro attire and just do like the normal improv troupe bullshit that never gets over and nobody ever cares about. I wanted to have like each of my guys be a caricature of themselves, and myself included. So it's like I've made other videos. It's JP Ward on the Ozone Improv Comedy Troupe. So if you want a better context, and watch that video or listen to that vlog. So like, there was one guy named Nick, and Nick was a party trick, and I wanted to turn him from a party trick into a performer. And there was ways that I did that with him specifically. And it was, you had Nick, and then I turned him into Stage Nick, and then I let Stage Nick play characters. So it was like different variations of emotional vulnerability and heightened vulnerability with him. And the look when we were on stage, he had a mohawk and, a purple, like kind of, club suit and, just piercings and tattoos. And that was kind of the aura of Nick that I wanted to go for. Well, there was a kid that was in my troupe, and he was the same age as those guys, maybe mid, late teens. And we had him do our music. He was our music act. He was our, little heartthrob with a guitar, emo, kid. But he did comedy songs. So he did emo songs, but they were comedy emo songs. And, just had him be a little emo kid, piercings and, tight clothes and, whatever. And his name was James. And you'll see, if you look on any of my pages that have my sketches on it, you'll see, him do he has a video called I'm Cutting Myself music video, or, Drunk Dialer music video. Those were all productions that he spearheaded. And I just kind of was a director and an editor on those projects, but he was the driving force behind all that stuff. Behind all the music videos for Ozone Improv Comedy Troupe. So just randomly, I was just kind of looking for ideas to spruce up the caricature that was James as the emo heartthrob of the Ozone Improv Comedy Troupe. And I just, I swear to you, as random can be, typed in the word James into Google, and the first thing that popped up was James Dean. And, obviously, kid in America, you know of James Dean. You don't really necessarily know about James Dean, but you've heard the name before. And I clicked on it, and I just started looking at him. I was like, God, this guy's really handsome. And I started to like just go down the James Dean rabbit hole for like the next 2 months. I was at the library every day reading books and articles and looking at pictures and film reels. And I rented Rebel Without a Cause and East of Eden and Giant and watched all these random little, home movies that he had made and pictures that he had taken of himself. I got like really, really obsessed with James Dean for like a month and a half. And it kind of like sidetracked me a little bit. And, sidetracked me from my work with Ozone Improv Comedy Troupe. And I just, I took out a book called Live Fast, Die Young by a writer by the name of John Gilmore. And I didn't really know what to expect. It was just, in my opinion at the time, it was just another James Dean book that I was going to read. And I like really got into this book. And at one point, like, him and James Dean are friends in New York City. And I believe they were sharing an apartment together. I'm not sure, but James Dean was a working actor and John Gilmore was a struggling actor. And that's where they met in New York City. They're both from the LA area, but they actually kind of just met in New York in the theater, community. And they got intimate with each other. And they became kind of like, sex friends, friends with benefits, Probably not quite boyfriends because this is in the 50s, late 40s, early 50s. So they probably weren't like full on together, but they were an item. Like they were having sex. They were, they were together. And, John Gilmore describes it in his book. And they remained friends and they both ended up back in LA. And they would, cruise Hollywood Boulevard together on their motorcycles, and they were just friends, And, James Dean died in his car, in his car crash in his Porsche. And they just kind of all went their separate ways. There was a girl that he had been seeing for a little bit, James Dean, and apparently she had gotten pregnant and she was with child when James Dean died. And apparently it was his. And, here we are, 50, 60 years later. And there's a book out called Hollywood Lit. And it's by a person that calls themselves Di Dean. And she claims to be the love child of this woman and James Dean. And, I mean, if you look at her picture, it kind of makes sense. I mean, I get it, But back to John Gilmore, he went on to be a beat writer and a gonzo journalist, and he did a lot of things with the Black Dahlia case, and he befriended Marilyn Monroe and was friends with her for, up until she passed away. And he did a lot of teaching, I think, in Massachusetts for a while. And, eventually made his way back to Hollywood and, just kind of wrote books, wrote true crime books and celebrity gossip books from the old, the glory days of Hollywood and stuff, the golden age of Hollywood. And I really got into his work. And at the back of one of his books, it said that he had a website. So I went to his website and it was legit. It was him. And it had his email. And I emailed him. I said, hey, I really like your book. I'm a gay dude from Connecticut. And, I just would really like to make a connection out in Hollywood because my end goal is to eventually go out to LA and, take my time, but, try my hand at the whole movie business and everything. And I'm only like 25 then, so I wasn't ready to make the leap yet, but I just wanted, I guess deep down wanted somebody to like humanize, the movie business, the all-encompassing Hollywood, the way that Bob Backlund, for me, had humanized the WWE and pro wrestling, and kind of, just made it so that I could at least be teachable, or, controllable, or like competent, or at least have a chance at being competent at, the movie business, and in Backlund's case, the wrestling business. And, he wrote me back and he said, well, yeah, I wouldn't mind having lunch with you or anything, but, Connecticut's a lot of miles between, LA and, whatever. And I stared at his email for probably about 15 minutes, and I just wrote a couple lines. I just said, do you have a contact number that I can reach you at, period, period, period. I'll be in LA next Friday. And that might sound kind of extreme, but that's what happened. I emptied out my apartment the next day, slept on my mom's couch for a couple days, bought a round trip bus ticket from Hartford to LA to Louisville to New York and then back to Hartford, because I had gotten a letter and a phone call from Ohio Valley Wrestling, which was WWE's developmental territory in Louisville, Kentucky. And, they were offering training. They said maybe I have something, and, if I wanted to come train with them, I could, and, go to camp with them. I would have to pay my own way, which it was impossible, but it was something that I was willing to go talk to somebody about. And I wanted to do this round trip just to see where I stand. And it just so happened that on the 15th of April 2007, Bob Backlund was going to be in New York doing something with Kevin Undergaro and Maria Menounos. I don't remember what it was. It was like something with a movie or something they did. I don't remember. But so it just kind of like worked out. So I cleared out my apartment. I bought a bus ticket, packed a couple sandwiches, and a backpack full of cigarettes and medication and clothes, and took the bus from Hartford to LA. Arrived at the Hollywood bus station, stayed at the Clarion Inn on Cahuenga Boulevard, and I went to the payphone and called him and said, hey, I'm in LA. I was like, can I meet you for lunch somewhere, just to get coffee or whatever? And he said, yeah, where are you? And I didn't know how to pronounce Cahuenga, so I said Chattanooga. And he started laughing. He says, you mean Cahuenga? I was like, I looked up at the sign. I'm like, oh, yeah, I do. They go, okay. Well, there's a diner around the corner called Mel's Diner. And I said, I'll meet you there tomorrow at like 11 if you want. I'm like, great. Yeah, I'll do that. And so I'm like, like super excited, right? Because I'm my first time in Hollywood, that far north in California. Like I stayed out in San Diego for an entire summer when I was a kid, but as an adult, I'd never been to California, and especially not, not Hollywood. It was the first time I ever been there. So, I'm just kind of like looking around and walking around, Hollywood and Hollywood Boulevard, and, different, just like touristy things, and just kind of get all that shit out of my system. And so the next day I get dressed and I'm like pacing back and forth in my hotel room. And like an hour before I go there, I go to Mel's Diner. I just sit there and wait. And he walks in, and I knew it was him right away, because in the pictures, like this one on this video, like they were all, from when he was a kid, when he was in his 20s or whatever. And I'd only seen like one picture of him as like a full-fledged grown man, you know. But he walked in, his hair was slicked back, he had sunglasses on, he was tall, thin, older white guy. And I kind of like flagged him down. I said, "Hey, sir, good to meet you." He said, "Okay." You know, we're just kind of just shooting the shit, keeping it light. And he ordered a side salad with ranch dressing, and I just ordered a coffee. And, you know, I kind of started asking some questions. You know, I was like, how was it, you know, back in the day compared to like now? I mean, like you guys, you know, back in the day and when you guys were doing your thing as, you know, teen idols and, you know, everything, it just seemed like there was like opportunities or like there was a different way of doing things. I'm missing something. He said, "Yeah." He said, "Back then we had theaters here. You know, so back then, you know, you could come out here and work in theaters and get agents and picked up by agents or agencies or studios or whatever from the local LA theater, you know, scene." And he said, "Now you don't really have that. Now it's mostly nepotism and second and third generation guys because there's really nowhere to get your foot in. So you kind of have to like just luck of the draw. It's not like you can, you know, get off the bus and, you know, all of a sudden you're the superstar, you know." And we just talked about that kind of stuff. And, you know, I happened to look over his left shoulder in the booth we were sitting in, and there's like an 8x10 of James Dean. It's not autographed or anything, but it's just an 8x10 of James Dean from the scene of Giant, from a still from the movie Giant. And I was like, whoa, that's creepy. And I actually found Hollywood and LA to be very creepy. Like, because there's like so many things that people know about, or like streets that people know about, or, you know, different things from movies you've watched over the last 50 years. And like, when you're just kind of like walking around or driving around or just kind of like there for an extended period of time, you hear those landmarks. You hear people talk about those landmarks, and it's like really creepy. It's like, wow, it's actually a real place, you know. And it's different. It's a different type of vibe, and you get over it eventually. You know, when you go out there and live, the vacation's over after, you know, a couple of weeks or months, and you just kind of get down to business. But at first, it's like, wow, that's weird. But I was just talking to him, and I didn't bring up like his sexual relationship with James Dean because I thought that would just be kind of inappropriate and creepy. You know, just to, you know, drive 3,000 miles to talk about him having sex with James Dean, you know, 60 years ago. But like, I needed him more than just that. Like, I needed him to do more than that for me. Like, I needed him to kind of, you know, in the brief, you know, 45 minutes to an hour that I had with him, that he allowed me to hang out with him, like, just kind of explain like the gist of what goes on in that town, I guess. The, you know, just the stuff I needed to know. And we left the restaurant, and I was about ready to walk back to the hotel. He said, "Come on, I'll show you around." We get in the car, and we go to this house in West Hollywood. And I think it was in West Hollywood or Hollywood. And there's some guys about my age, and they're drinking wine out in the back porch. And you know, we're just talking. Introduced myself to them, and they hand me their business cards and stuff. And John starts giving out books, and there's this book that he had written about Marilyn Monroe, and he signed copies for all of us, and so that was cool. And actually, on my way to Louisville, somewhere in Texas, I fell asleep reading the book, and when I woke up, the book was gone. Damn it. And he had signed it to J. Makes for Good Gossip, John Gilmore. And it was a book that he read about Marilyn Monroe. Because he was friends with her, too. And he kind of spilled the tea on a bunch of stuff about her. Not that it was inappropriate or disrespectful or anything, but it was just kind of, setting the record straight between myth and Norma Jean, Which I think there's a lot of myth. And from what it sounds like, there's a lot of myth about James Dean, too. Like, there's stories that everybody knows about him, about, revving his motorcycle outside of the church of Pierre Angeli and, Victimone's, wedding. And he said that never happened. It was just Hollywood bullshit. And he was just a very nice man. And at the house that we were at, that little like frat house kind of thing, I went outside to smoke a cigarette and he came out. He was like, in the book where I was talking about you, where like James Dean and Jack Nicholson kind of like got at it a little bit. I was like, yeah. Like, well, that happened in this house and it happened right where you were standing. Like, oh man, that's fucking radical. So like it was just like little stuff like that was like so creepy and so like awesome at the same time. And he brought me back to the Clarion, and I just kind of like, I didn't want to seem like fanboyish or like nonsense, but there was something that like I wanted to know, like what was the ratio or the distance between James Dean, like the guy that he was like intimate with, his friend, the person, James Dean, and like the icon, James Dean, the image or the myth, like what was like what's like the distance there? Like, I mean, what's Hollywood bullshit and what's like a real life person that had his mother die at 9 years old and maybe was confused sexually and was like a, real tortured artist and had father issues and, maybe some emotional issues and just the person, like this human being, James Dean, compared to like the cigarette ad, James Dean, or, the Louis Vuitton ad, James Dean, right? Like what's the distance between those two guys? And I don't really remember how I asked that question, but he said basically like it's just all bullshit. I mean, he didn't. I'm not gonna paraphrase him. I'm not gonna quote him, but it was like, they just, you're a product. You're a product with inside a product. Like the fruitcake wing of the CIA, Hollywood, the all encompassing. And he drove off. And I put my stuff in in my room at the hotel. And I got like really depressed. Because he had humanized Hollywood. And it wasn't that exciting anymore. I remember walking by the Palladium, and this is when they were renovating it, or before somebody bought it and renovated it and turned it back into a nightclub. It's like, man, this is like the shit. Back in the 60s, this was like this is a big deal. And it was like boarded up. It's like, yes, I know this is where I'm supposed to be. I knew in Hollywood that if the stars aligned, this was where I was supposed to be. If I could get some legit conservatory time and I had the money to sit at the table, that I could probably get something done. I didn't know what, but I knew I could get something done. So I left the Hollywood bus station the next day. I was over there for like 2.5 days. And I drove to Louisville. And, I didn't really care about wrestling. Working for Jason Knight and the Indies. Yeah. It's kind of a firecracker instead of a nuke. And I wanted a nuke. I didn't want a firecracker. I think if Backlund wasn't going to get me a job with WWF doing something at 19, then I'd rather just go full board and go to Hollywood. And I think that's what that trip like kind of did for me. And Kevin Undergaro basically really cemented that for me when after the function and we were just hanging out at a nightclub. He said, look, you're not carrying Backlund's bags anymore, man. You know Hollywood. You know it probably more than anybody, that back in your small town. Like, I mean, you have an advantage. You have that advantage. And it's not going to be easy. It takes money, it takes time, it takes energy, it takes grit. And he was right. I went back home and I saved up money for a couple years. And in November of 2010, I got on a bus and just with a phone number of some lady that said I could sleep on her couch and did the starving actor thing out in Hollywood. My intention, I guess, was to go out there and be a sketch comedian because that was kind of like what I love to do. But, I mean, obviously, a sketch comedian with the intention of going further into film and TV and stuff. But after a couple months, I didn't have the money to do it the way that it needs to be done, the right way. Like Gilmore was saying, like, get into a conservatory that has a theater attached to it and really be able to hone your craft and not just be amateur hour or clown or whatever, and just really be able to do it the right way. And he was right. And that was 11 years ago. And I recently found out that he passed away in 2018. I got like really sad about that because he was a really good guy. From what I knew of him, just from that day he spent with me and took the time to hang out with me in Hollywood and show me around and humanize that town and the myth of that town. That was like a really cool thing to do. And I'm sure he's done it for other people, but that was just something really cool because it seems really awkward and really strange and really bizarre that somebody would do that. Travel 3,000 miles just to have a coffee with him. But like those are the type of situations that I'd get myself into when I was a kid, when I was in my 20s. So that was my experience with John Gilmore, the one-time lover of James Dean. God bless. Godspeed. Rest in peace, sir.